Great. Okay, so welcome. Good to see you. Thanks for coming out on a Wednesday night to Nelson. I'm Andy Abbott. I'm the lead artist on part of the on the Nelson Reimagined strand of the This is Nelson Town Deal programme. This is the second of a series of talks, interdisciplinary talks, thinking about the future of Nelson and what this kind of investment that's coming in through the Nelson Town Deal could mean, and how we sort of work with that. And the idea really is to bring in some guests. Today we've got Owen Griffiths, who's come all the way from Swansea this morning, and we've got Arif as well, who I think has travelled less of that. Is here as our local expert. And yeah, I guess our thinking behind it was that we would bring in people that kind of might be able to offer a sort of slightly different perspective or connected perspective on what's happening here, and then sort of ground that in some local context. So just for people that kind of maybe aren't sort of familiar with what we're doing, I'm going to give a bit of a recap just for so you know what the sort of shape of the evening looks like. Yeah, I'm going to do a bit of a recap around both Nelson Reimagined as a sort of strand within the large programme, then pass on to Carenza McLennan, who'll talk a little bit about This is Nelson, give you a bit of background on that. And then Arif Khan's going to talk about the Friendship Cafe that's been going down at the Pavilion Cafe. And then we'll have Owen as our sort of lead speaker tonight. But the idea is that there'll be some sort of conversational moment of conversation between the two. A bit of Q&A, which can come from you, and of course, people that are watching through Zoom as well. Or I think Andrew is going to be fielding things on Facebook as well, if people wanted to sort of put on there. And then we'll let you know a bit about the next steps and the next event that we've got. So Nelson Reimagined, it's a sort of strand within this overall programme for the This is Nelson and Town Deal work. And I suppose it's the artist-led strands, and the idea is that it's sort of looking towards the future of Nelson, and kind of like a lot of kind of the investment that happens around these programmes is kind of very immediate, what can be done tomorrow. And we thought it'd be good and useful to have a kind of conversation about what the kind of further life of this sort of investment might be, and what a sort of sustainable future per place that Nelson could be. So when we kind of talk about, I guess, reimagining, it's a sort of word that gets used quite a lot or knocked about at the moment, and kind of perhaps a bit overused. But I suppose the reason to sort of think about it as reimagining rather than imagining is that you're sort of working with what's there already, and it's kind of okay. So you sort of take the constituent parts and think, well, what could they be in the future? And we're not sort of just thinking about future in a sort of sci-fi, okay, what's the sort of dream sort of scenario that we could be in? It's really thinking about, well, what are the different options with what we've got here? And that might also be sort of thinking about what's happened in the past, as well as kind of what's happening right now, to kind of to do that sort of looking in the future. And yeah, as I mentioned, the idea of having sort of artists like Owen and kind of Catherine Burma we had in the previous sort of talk, is that we can have kind of a global perspective or an international perspective on things that are happening at a very local level. I think this kind of idea of thinking global and getting to act local or acting local is something that's kind of really important to the programme as a whole. So for those of you that don't know Nelson, I suppose I'm talking to people more on Zoom than that are in the room. Nelson's a post-industrial town, might get a few more sort of ideas around and stats on that from the speakers later on. But yeah, like a lot of post-industrial towns, it's a place that was built on a certain type of industry that no longer exists there, and that sort of sometimes creates a bit of a crisis of identity and sort of different kind of uneven developments that happen in places like this. So, you know, I've come from working a lot in Bradford and then Leeds before that, and growing up in Derbyshire, and you see this kind of similar kind of situation that happens in these places that were once formed around a very specific type of work or specific type of activity. When that goes, they're kind of left in this in-between state. And I think that's kind of something that Nelson, as well as being an incredibly rich and diverse place, also has these challenges that are based on this kind of idea of kind of having not quite landed in the near future, which is really an exciting place to be. And I see those sort of places as, you know, often being talked about as quite fragile and fractured, but it's within the cracks of those kind of fractured places that all this interesting kind of potential grows, and all this kind of different ways of doing emerges. So I'm quite interested in this idea of post-industrial towns as being both sort of resilient and innovative, but kind of almost like towns of the future, and maybe reclaiming that idea of kind of, or countering that narrative of kind of towns like Nelson's being left behind and they have to kind of catch up and level up, but actually, well, what's here that actually does more than that and goes beyond what we're thinking about. So yeah, I've kind of used this phrase before, nicked it from, I think it gets used in sort of tech world, but yeah, this idea of sort of bleeding edge kind of places. So actually being on the cutting edge of development or being there is actually sometimes quite a difficult place to be. And so we can think about that as the bleeding edge. And yeah, sort of thinking about articulating or reframing what we mean as the resources of a place. And yeah, eventually hoping to sort of forge a new path that might come in with this sort of investment that's happening. So how are we doing that with the sort of within the Nelson Reimagined strand? It's being done through a sort of program of artist research. So the idea with artistic research, I suppose, is that artists can generate new questions and fields of inquiry that might sort of not have been thought about in places before. They kind of come in with a different way of looking at things. That we can create some kind of virtuous cycle of research. So it's kind of people coming in maybe that could ask questions, but work with people to identify, well, what's the work that's already been done and the questions that are there, and kind of create a kind of cycle of ongoing inquiry in a place. I'm very keen on this sort of idea of low intervention regeneration, or sort of thinking about, well, what's not the kind of what's the most elegant way of kind of people coming in and making changes in places, rather than with plans to kind of say, right, we'll put all this in place, but how do we sort of do that? Sort of taking something from the world of natural wine, I suppose, but thinking about how you might use a low intervention approach to places that need to kind of forge a different path. And yeah, using this word reimagine to think, well, it's not a new Nelson that we're talking about, it's kind of something that would be sort of retaining its existing character or unearthing character from a prior version as well. So the artist research is being carried out by a team of researchers that have all been sort of selected through an open call and through micro commissions. So we've got Michael Powell, who's based in Tomberden, but is looking at sort of Nelson's underused spaces and the commons and the idea of accessibility to those. Dana, who's here with us tonight, who's looking around growing and food and the migrant communities that exist in Nelson as well. Christina Borg, who's in Malta, but has already been over here is here joining us online. Hi, Christina. Looking at the green and blue spaces of Nelson and thinking about how those can be mapped. Sam Jones is looking at the sort of potential for self-organising and different forms of governance that might sort of come out or have been used in Nelson, and I'm looking at working with young people around the idea of future of work and kind of what employment has been, could be in the future with young people that are using digital technologies. So we've had a sort of just over a month now of kind of some of this research being doing, and it's learning. Really, it's kind of a process of inquiry and sort of mapping and kind of talking to people and gathering things, because this is an overall 4-year program. So at this point, we're just sort of thinking, well, what's out there? What is there to build on? And how can artists come in and ask kind of questions in a different way here? So as I say, the Interdisciplinary Conversation series kind of goes along with that research, and is maybe about sort of bringing in some people from elsewhere to give us some different perspectives that we can sort of link in with, but grounding those conversations in a local context. And just to kind of say what we'd hope from today certainly is that we can sort of take some questions by the end of the day that we can then sort of follow up. Well, I think Dana might be doing that in a session yourself, but kind of some kind of from today, what can we glean from these sort of other examples that are happening elsewhere, and apply that and kind of activate it in Nelson. So yeah, our last conversation was with Catherine Berm, who does a lot of work around alternative economies and community economies, and talked about sort of Company Drinks, which is a drinks company that she set up with a group as a sort of alternative form of doing things in a way of kind of forming kind of social bonds through something like a drinks company. But she really brought in this idea of icebergian economics. So when you think about economics, this is through sort of J.K. Gibson Graham, but also sort of people like Gregory Shillette talked about dark matter. But yeah, a lot of the time, when you think about economics, you only see the kind of tip of the iceberg, or it's the formal economy, and there's loads of stuff going on underneath the surface that maybe we don't really appreciate as part of the economy. And actually, once you start digging into that sort of stuff underground, that's where all this kind of potential, all this sort of more sustainable futures can be found. So yeah, I'll come to Arif and Owen shortly, but I'll just invite Karenza to come up and quickly just give you a bit of a recap on the This Is Nelson programme as well. Yeah, just.
Hello, everybody. I am going to literally run through this very quickly because I'm quite keen to get on to the main chat of the evening. But I suppose for maybe people out there who might not know what we're embarking on in Nelson at the moment is that Nelson was successful in getting a £25 million town deal investment from the government, which is to look at town centre regeneration. And so myself, working with In-Situ and building bridges, of which we're in currently, working together and with other partners across the town, we were able to secure approximately £1 million of investment, which is of that 25 million, that will look at an arts and cultural and engagement programme, of which we're calling This Is Nelson. And obviously, Andy has illustrated what the basis of certainly the artist-led strand that we have within our programme. We have other strands. We have about 5 strands within This Is Nelson, which will endeavour to reach across different aspects of the town and cultural engagement, as well as obviously at the heart of it is creative and artists. And as it said there on my little notes, this will be achieved through creative permissions, community events, and the reactivation of places and spaces. So the programme strands, as I mentioned, artist-led, we're in it at the moment, a heritage programme, working with young people, working across neighbourhoods, and then looking at kind of town centre partnerships and interventions. And obviously working in a kind of regeneration context, a lot of it is quite standard. But we have 3.5 years with which to kind of explore, to play, and to hopefully at the end of it, there is some significant shifts and changes. We can't possibly change the town like Andy's illustrated. We have to reimagine, we have to look at what we have here already. And so just to illustrate the strands, certainly around, this is some of the work that we've done already, is very much about asking people about, it's a really interesting question of what people want. Often it's not really what people want, but I think people, because we don't know what we want, but I think people like to be engaged, to have the conversation, and we very much try and create and open up that conversation. And certainly within this first year, that 3.5 years, that half year, we've got to use as research, exploration and conversation. So this is something we did in the town, and well, Diane helped us with this. This is something we did in the libraries. So exploring the strands, like I mentioned before, actually might just pop back to that. So heritage programme, what we're R&D, what we're researching at the moment is working with photographer Craig Easton, who his work up there. No, not around. Anyway, we have worked in the town before. He has a very strong social documentary style to what he does. And with the heritage strand, again, we're just exploring next week with him. He's around. We're looking at the stories around the first immigrants who came to the town. So the pioneers communities, trying to capture Nelson in the 1960s. And what's quite interesting for us is that Nelson, the town system, and the 1960s very much seen as the heyday of Nelson, and the Pendle Rise was built. And here we are, 100 years later, with Pendle Rise about to be, closed. And so we've got this arc of time which marks Nelson in a kind of very interesting regeneration period of time. So as well as obviously through conversation, connecting with communities, we're asking Craig to maybe explore that within a social documentary context. Young people, we've touched on what And we're saying about working with young people, but obviously In-Situ and Building Bridges, we work quite extensively with young people, colleges, schools, and we want to try and bring their voice in as much as we possibly can. Similarly, Building Bridges with neighbourhoods, and Dana's been doing quite a lot recently, reaching out to neighbourhoods, finding out what's going on, who are the new groups coming in, how can we engage them, how can we help, how can we celebrate their cultures within our town. Town centre partnerships, I mean, we have some people here from Super Slowways Ripple Effect group. There we go. Good representation. So that's a really great example of how we can work collaboratively with other.
I am here, sorry, I'm just on mute because I'm driving.
Oh, hi, Paddy. Yeah, hi, Paddy. Yeah, so obviously partnerships, there is lots going on. There's great work going on. We don't want to be seen as taking over or working in a silo. So it's very much about how can we work with initiatives. So the linear park being a prime example, the town centre regeneration is happening anyway if Pendle Rise were to close. How can we work with those initiatives? So these are lots of really nice pictures. Lots to talk about heritage. I am just going to run through this and probably end it there.
There's just a couple of
There's some images of Craig work. Yeah. There we go. We should have used this to illustrate my work. I didn't. So there we go. And obviously, it's a really exciting time. We're here to. This images here from a think tank project, a live project that we did with students from Manchester School of Architecture, where we explored what could happen in the town centre. So you can see here images of pop-up seating. And then obviously mentioned before the linear park and working with the canal. One of the things that we have had that's up and running, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, is that we have established what we're calling the community assembly, and it's a regular meeting. The next one is 14th of March. Yeah, 14th of March. I think people who have signed up have also got a link to join as we can. We have it's in real life, so we all get together. It's a really great opportunity for people to talk about their programs of work, so Super Slowway, Building Bridges ourselves, but also to hear other people, hear what's going on in the communities, offer opportunities for people to get involved. It's been a great opportunity when we bring artists in to reconnect with groups. So far so good. It's going really well. So I do, if you are local and able to join, I do recommend. And plus we do put on a bit of food as well. There we go. There we go. That's so there we go. I'll leave it at that. But thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Thank you. So yeah, I'm happy that we can have both our local experts tonight and sort of continue this conversation about what's actually going on in Nelson at the moment. I'm just going to change the format of these slides so they don't get a little weird. And you should just be able to. Are you all right coming and sat?
Yes,
sat
of course.
sat here?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So hello to everyone here, and of course everyone virtually as well. I think I've met most of you guys previously. I like to see some old faces here as well. So nice to see you all guys again. So I've been told the brief that I got from Shabazz was he wanted me to come in, not as a local expert, but I've taken that point now, but as a to talk about the Friendship Cafe, talk about what's been happening there for the past 8 years. So I was having this conversation earlier on with someone. So when did we start the Friendship Cafe? And as a guesstimate, I was thinking maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but it turns out we started in 2015. And even I couldn't believe it. I was thinking, wow, we've started it that long ago and it's progressed as a project, and it almost becomes an intrinsic part of your life that you don't actually sort of measure it in terms of time, which was amazing actually. So yeah, 2015. So a bit of background to Nelson, of course, most of you from here as well. So this is, of course, from my opinion and view as a local expert, I would say. So I've put a quote on there saying it's the best place to live in Nelson, the best place to live, full stop. And I would say that, which is quite a big statement, with my own personal experiences of having lived in London for a significant period of time, having lived in Sheffield for a significant period of time, having lived in Bristol, and then still saying, I'm coming home to Nelson. But on balance, it's a fantastic place to live. We have a great amount of diversity, lots of interesting things going on, lots of interesting people from different backgrounds, from different experiences, all different age groups. We have everything going for the town, I think, and lots of potential. So I like the use of the word Nelson reimagined, not changed, because in my view, the town doesn't need to be changed per se. It almost needs to be reimagined, and that is the word to use. So it's a really good choice of words. So back to the cafe. In terms of history, we established it in 2015. Why? Food, company, and signposting. It's very simple what we do. We're open initially on a Friday night, once every 2 weeks. People would come in. We would serve a 3-course meal, and that would be a home-cooked 3-course meal. Various foods, various delights, various menus, all cooked by volunteers at the cafe. Simply put, people would come in, we would serve them, no formal registration process, no qualification process. Anyone who came through that door, we would serve them. And we would serve them, we would serve them a 3-course meal, team of volunteers, and the point is to serve, have conversations with them. And we got a real mix of people through the door 8 years ago, and it's still the same now. So people who would come in, perhaps they suffer from drug use issues or they suffer from alcoholism, fine, and they need a meal, fine. We had people who were quite elderly who just came in for company and conversation. We had people who came in from various different parts of the community who literally wanted to come in and engage with people and have conversations with them. And we would serve them, we would have that policy, and that policy has continued for the past 8 years. So on average, we have, let's say, 30 people per week that now come in. So we've now moved from doing it once every 2 weeks to now having it every single Friday. We have 4 teams of volunteers with 4 team leaders that are on once every 4 weeks. So it's got to that sort of level of organization and planning, which is really good. And then in the backdrop, you've got cooking teams, you've got serving teams, you've got cleaning teams, which will also be engaged. And it's actually one of the sort of not obvious sort of plans of the Friendship Cafe when it was first created, but it's created this almost network of volunteers in the background, which in itself is almost like a community, which has been an amazing sort of consequence that we didn't actually think would be one of the obvious ones that comes through. Ethos. So some of the things that we looked at, and I've got on there when I was thinking about it today, certainly dignity and quality. So when people think of a soup kitchen, this is not a soup kitchen. We will call it a community cafe. We will call it a community kitchen. And this is what it is. We will come in, when we serve a meal, we will serve a top quality home cooked 3-course meal, i.e. it's good enough for, it's nicer than the food that I have at home often, so it's amazing. And we have that policy that we will only, so when people come in, they feel, one, not only welcomed and engaged, but they feel that they are being treated with dignity and respect, and they're having the quality that they deserve, which they absolutely do, in my opinion anyway. Engagement. So it's about using the cafe as a means and mechanism to really engage and bring people together. And that still applies now. We've got examples now of, I will say it's a formal word, service users, but people who've come into the cafe as service users and have actually developed into being volunteers and are now engaged in the running of the organization. They're involved with the cooking of the food. They're involved with sort of befriending and signposting individuals that come in. And the other point is that we are non-judgmental and impartial. So irrespective of your background, irrespective of your circumstances, that isn't something which is questioned. People come in and people are made to feel comfortable and welcomed, and that is it. It isn't a point of, oh yeah, you qualify and you don't qualify, because of course, absolutely everyone qualifies. It doesn't make any difference. So certainly that's what it was. And on the screen there, There's a couple of images of some of the food. There's a chocolate gateau and there's a mincemeat curry there as well. Not to sell our services, but you're more than welcome to come anytime. Recent activity. So in terms of notable recent activity above and beyond what our regular sort of Friday service. So during the pandemic, we didn't close. We actually turned into a takeaway service instead, because the actual need and demand was still there. So we continued doing that. We moved it at that point from in the pandemic from a fortnightly service to a weekly service, which is good. We've recently run a food voucher scheme, which has been interesting. A lot of the local food banks and local organisations have been given an allocation of money, which has been to assist them with purchasing food and then, of course, distributing that food, whether it be through a food bank or any other means of mechanism. And the approach that we've adopted at the cafe has been slightly different. Is our service users who would want and need vouchers for food or requires a food supply, what we actually did is we ran a policy where we would actually meet them at Morrison's. They would go out, they would carry out a shop. That shop would, up to the value of, let's say, £100 or £200, and they would buy what they want, what is suitable for them, what they like, and if you're anything like me, I can be quite fussy what you like and what you dislike. So it wasn't almost like a mixed box of, well, this is some pasta and some cereal in there and whatever you need. They would buy what they liked and what they needed, and then they would meet us at the till, and then payment would be made, and they would go away with a trolley full of exactly the items that they need. So that food voucher scheme fitted in with our sort of approach of serving people with that level of dignity and sort of that personal touch as well, of course. We've had Christmas specials, which of course have happened year upon year, which has been a recent one. And if you can see it in the photo on the bottom sort of right hand corner, that's what our Christmas meal looked like. I hope it looks good. It looks good to me. And then of course, over the past 8 years, we've become more actively involved in the actual running of the Pavilion Cafe as an enterprise and entity in its entirety, and moved away from actually just running that session every single Friday night. And of course, we've gone through a refurbishment as well. So you might see that photo on the next slide, the bottom right-hand corner, our newly or fairly newly refurbished cafe now, which I'm sure most of you guys have now been to. I was asked to say a bit on future plans. And one thing which we have discussed and talked about on numerous occasions is diversifying and having a mobile service. Would there be a need? Would there be a demand? Can we still deliver that with the same ethos? Can we still do it in such a way where we can still have the engagement and, importantly, the conversations with people who use the service? And that's been something which I spoke about quite a lot. Further refurbishment, I would say it's a relatively new building. It's like I think it's like a 1970s build, but it certainly needs some more love and attention. So what that refurbishment looks like, yet to be decided, yet to be agreed, but it's certainly on the cards. And then, of course, looking at two other factors, because, of course, we've been running now for 8 years. Week in, week out, we deliver the service that needs to be delivered and has been delivered. But then actually looking at and proactively considering additional delivery and quality and impact. And I think we're at a stage now where it's about almost refocusing to see, okay, what else can we do above and beyond? Who else can we engage? Who else can we work with that allows for additional delivery? Because, of course, no, above and beyond feeding people, which is what we do in essence, we act as a signposting organisation as well. So people will come in with various problems, whether it be drug or alcohol related, it could be housing related, it could be benefit related, whatever it may be. And we have acted as a signposting organisation where we will point people in the right direction. But how do we then perhaps take that to the next level? And of course, that ties in with the final point on the slide, which is around quality and impact, increasing that as well. So the question that was sort of put to me when I was putting these slides together is, how can art or cultural activity help address food poverty security in Nelson? And actually, when I looked at it in the context of the Friendship Cafe, I don't think there was a an obvious answer that stood out to me that I thought, oh, well, this is how you could do it. And this is really with my really boring, non-artistic mind, of course. But one of the things that I certainly thought of is how can we use and develop the cafe and of course art and culture in that context to attract additional service users? What sort of artistic or cultural activities could we utilize the space for that would increase the amount of service users and people being involved in the cafe? The space itself is absolutely lovely. Location is absolutely great. We have a huge bowling green in front, and we have a nice park next door as well. How do we really maximize that through the means of art and culture? And is there a way of doing that? I would think so. Absolutely, yes. And that links into the second point. So it's the art and culture to engage and transform. And when I say transform, I'm just thinking now about what I mentioned about the refurbishment. How do we artistically transform that in a means and way for it to become more effective? And then it's about art and culture as a new means of marketing. And when I thought about that, I thought about local food provision in Nelson. So whether it be through the Friendship Cafe, whether it be through food banks, how do people know that these services exist? How are these services marketed? How do people know that actually I can contact this number, I can go to the Friendship Cafe? And how do we utilize art and culture to promote and engage people so they know that these things are going on? So they're the sort of things that I thought of. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cheers. I mean, we'll keep on going through, but if you've got any kind of like questions, hold them, and we'll sort of maybe weave them into like a sort of discussion with Owen afterwards. So Owen, I'd like to invite you to take the chair. sorry if your slides are going by themselves, but so keep you on track, won't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, just going to do a quick sign check. Okay, so can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so well, I don't know how to follow that, because that's like probably, in my opinion, probably one of the most important cultural projects that I've ever seen manifested. So it's really beautiful to see that work. It's really important political community work. And I keep thinking of, you know, when we think about those projects, is it cultural? Is it community? It's all one, isn't it? Because actually food is a critical part of our cultural identities. And also I often think of Raymond Williams, who's a great Welsh philosopher, who said culture is ordinary. And, you know, we take for granted our food systems and what's on our plate all the time. So the ordinariness, the everyday things are critical to our cultural things. So I really would love to come and visit. And it's just an amazing project. So yeah, fantastic. I completely forgot what I was going to talk about. Oh, yes. So I'm Owen. I'm from Swansea in South Wales. Noswaith Dda, it's a bit of Welsh for you. I come from a post-industrial landscape by the sea. I can take my hat off now because I only wear the hat because there's photographs taken. I'm losing my hair. There's no photographs, so I can speak from this direction now. So I'm just going to I'm going to tell you a few stories about projects that we've been working on, and also tell you about just some of the keywords and the key things that we've been trying to develop in Swansea, which is about sustaining projects and sustaining cultural kind of networks and building a kind of cultural kind of connectivity, and a lot of that work is about reconnection. So I've heard a lot of really key words tonight in Andy's introduction as well, edges, you know, all these kinds of phrases which are really kind of resonant. And these are some of the keywords. This is my level of digital ability, but these are some of the keywords that I think are really critical to the way I work and the way that the company I set up with some friends in lockdown kind of works as well. And it's about this long-term work, a little bit like In-Situ, and about the cafe as well. Like, this is serious long-term work, okay? So all these cultural projects, when you're asked to come in and do a project which is just a sort of small drop-in, it's fine as long as that's part of a longer narrative. And I think that's the criteria for successful cultural projects, is this long-term investment. And often art galleries or art institutions or funders really don't understand that process. So it's really amazing to see the work that In-Situ is doing in terms of the long term. Collaboration, critical to all the successful projects. localism and the idea of digging where you stand, so taking responsibility for the land that you stand on and live on and work on and use and extract things from. How can we form radical change? Well, maybe one methodology for me is to work exactly where I stand, and that's a really critical thing. Usefulness. This is a really, I mean, obviously there's a lot of kind of different trends in the art world, but there is a really interesting movement around useful art projects and the idea of applying art projects as useful tools for change. And there's a whole network of those projects called Art Utile, which we can signpost you to later, but that's really interesting as a resource. And also about friendship. I was really liked the way that Arif was talking about the participants that are coming, and how do people move from service users to collaborators to friends? And that's a really organic and really normal thing. And often we kind of get a little bit like, oh, that's a bit, we don't know if we can do that. But actually that's really key, and that's really radical as well, and a really radical way of working. So I really like that idea of friendship as a way of kind of bringing these things together. So just some keywords. So often I use this image, the two images here on the screen, because this feels like this is what we're doing at the moment. We're gleaning the landscape in some way. If you think about the kind of state of the world, or the state of the UK and Wales, Scotland, we think about where we all are and what's happening, especially in the post-industrial states. The word gleaning could be something that we're working really closely with, the act of gleaning. What can we glean from the spoils of capitalism? What can we kind of explore in our post-industrial landscapes? And how can we really think about what's left, and how can we use it? And how can we use it in a different resource? So on the left, you've got an image which is Mealy, and it's the gleaners. And on the right, we've got an image called Hauling Coal Back to the Village. And it's a photograph by Mike Berry of the Rhondda Valley in South Wales in 1985. So it's, high Thatcherism, the wholesale destruction of communities, as it was in this part of the world as well. So these guys are gleaning bits of coal to warm the house, warm the families. And there was a radical movement, actually, which we haven't got time to go into now, which was led by amazing community leaders, mostly all women, in the miners' welfare halls of South Wales, and probably up here as well, which was about collecting food. And there's a really radical kind of history of this stuff, from collecting food for the Spanish Civil War, from the miners' valleys, to resourcing and feeding each other at times of crisis. Again, we saw some of that happening in COVID times. So interesting kind of reconnection. Again, this is a sort of map of some of the projects that I've been doing, and I realized a couple of years ago that actually it's all just one big project. It's about working locally, and just realizing that and going, oh yeah. And I think everybody else had realized it, but I was the last one to the table. But realizing that this local work is basically what I'm trying to do, and I'm just trying to map some of these different projects and different manifestations. Just a little bit about the industry then. So Swansea's kind of history was copper. And what I wanted to link to was that actually what's really interesting about the post-industrial landscapes is that they're in a constant state of excavation or regeneration or rewilding. There's always some kind of live process. All landscapes are live, but somehow the post-industrial ones for me are the most interesting ones. It's the ones that are connected to international narratives, from capitalism to empire to globalism to extraction. All these kinds of narratives come from this post-industrial landscape. And actually, this is Swansea Valley on the left-hand side. This was the copper smelting capital of the world at one point. And if you go to any museum or many of the museums in Wales, you will see industrial heritage, the good old days. Everybody's obsessed with our industrial heritage, obsessed about talking about those great moments of industrial heritage, but they're not talking about the other narratives that are underneath that surface. The kind of, we know about the kind of landslides and the kind of movement of that land, and that somehow that's sort of happening culturally now, in that we're actually talking about decolonizing these landscapes, thinking about the connections between these post-industrial landscapes and these larger narratives of kind of capitalism, globalism, empire, and so on. One of the key things that a lot of people don't know about this part of Swansea is, a lot of people in Swansea, is that just up the valley, the White Rock foundry is where they used to make the manillas for the slave trade. So we can see the direct connection between this local industrial landscape and slavery. It's all there, but actually it's only there if you choose to engage with it, because the dominant narratives are those of this romantic vision of the industrial landscape and industrial past. And from industrial past to industrial farming and industrial food systems. This is a quote from Carolyn Steele, who's an architect and a writer and a theorist. And there's a link which Callum can put in the chat. So we've got this collaboration, me and Callum now is going to put things in the chat for me. So there's a link to a really great talk, which don't watch it now, watch it after we go, which is about food systems and about a book called Situpia. So you can watch that at your leisure later on. But Carolyn said, this is probably in the wrong place, but it's kind of related. But we worked a couple of years ago, we worked with a philosopher called Roman Krasnarek, who wrote a great book about the idea of how to become a good ancestor. And when we think about, that's why it links ancestors, right? There you go. So when we think about this stuff, we often need to think about, like, what are the practices that we're doing now? If we're going to imagine these utopias, we're going to build these systems. And Roman says, we treat the future like a distant colonial outpost, devoid of people, where we can freely dump ecological degradation, technological risk, nuclear waste, and public debt. So in Wales, we have the Future Wellbeing of Generations Act. So everything that happens, well, everything, not you're putting your socks on, but everything you do in Wales has to consider the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So every kind of governmental decision, cultural decision, funding allocation, every kind of bit of public infrastructure is connected to an acknowledgement or a kind of signing up to the Wellbeing of Future Generation Act, which is it's the only one in the world. And so just to prove that Wales can model radical change if it really wants to. And it's the smaller scale of countries like Wales that gives us the ability to model that radical change. So this idea of working towards future generations and kind of understanding these kind of projects. I just wanted to signpost out to some other projects which are really interesting, which might be good for the collective research. I feel like we're in a kind of research group here now, and I can share these things with you. But this is a great project. You probably know it, Andy, but it's called Dirt Wain, and it's by Brett Bloom, who's an amazing artist and a good friend. And this project, I mean, it's just extraordinary. He's working in his hometown, Fort Wayne, and he basically decided to start a composting project because there was nobody composting. So compost, a critical part of this idea of food infrastructure and our future. We will become compost at some point. So this is really kind of critical in terms of how in an American kind of city like this, how do we compost? Where's the knowledge? Where's the education? Let alone kind of, bringing permaculture and all those kinds of methodologies into stuff. How can we process this waste, which we're producing on epic amounts, more and more all the time, including food waste? So I urge you to look that project up as a bit of inspiration when we're thinking about these projects in Pendle, and think about the idea of, like, what role will compost have in this work that we're doing? It's critical. And have a look at this amazing project. They've just crowdfunded this amazing truck which goes around now picking up compost and sorting it all out. And you can buy their compost, but you can also support the project. This is another really interesting project called Mini Munchen. It's an urban design festival that was developed by two artists I think in the sort of 70s or 80s. I can't quite remember. I've been to this festival in Munich. It's amazing. It's an urban design festival run by children. And if you want to go to be part of the festival, you have to apply for a visa. And then some very officious children look through your paperwork and decide whether they're going to let you in or not. Sometimes you don't get in, and sometimes you get in, and you can walk around this park where they're basically building cities. They're building transport infrastructure, they're growing food, they've got cafes that feed everybody. The cafes, it's a kind of socialist kind of model based around the idea of how do we want to live and how can we design new systems. And of course, they kind of recreate a lot of the kind of systems they see or their parents are part of or they're a part of. But actually what's really interesting is the way they articulate and the way they kind of model these things. So there's an incredible archive of the different things. It's on for like 3 or 4 months and kids go every day. It's funded directly by the German government. And I remember one story, the police came to do a talk about, the police are not, we're friendly people, you can approach us. there was a kind of mass uprising from the kids, and they ejected the Munich police from the camp. So it just goes to show that actually you can actually be talking to children about these things, and be modeling kind of ways in which we could be redesigning these infrastructures. So I'm going to talk about some of our projects now, and talk about some of the works that we've done, or I've done, over the last couple of years in Swansea. So this is a kind of map of some of these projects. And what we're developing, or what I'm slowly building up, is some kind of archipelago of green spaces. And I think that word archipelago is really interesting in terms of a series of kind of relationships based around localism, around a connectivity, and around a kind of warmth work and community resilience, and also kind of using the idea of a cultural practice or an art practice to leverage in a whole load of other agendas, which can meet a lot of kind of issues or problems that those communities are facing and working through. So one of those kind of key questions that we're kind of working with is, what are the true narratives of the post-industrial landscape? So these are the landscapes of where we're working. This is called, this is an image from Swansea Museum. It's called lupins growing on foundry sand. And it's just like this idea of rewilding these bits of landscape. So this is just the docks and the kind of area of the city where, images like this were just like part of the redevelopment of the kind of post-war redevelopment of the city. But actually what was happening, or what is possible, is this kind of rewilding on this kind of edges and these processes. So some of the projects kind of become exhibitions, some of them are gardens, some of them are different bits of infrastructure. This is an exhibition called Thinking Green, and we've got a series of podcasts just about to launch from that, and I can send those to you in the future and you can listen to them, but they're about things like, one of them is called Decolonizing the Garden, one of them is about urban futures, one of them is about social civic space. So all kind of related kind of content and research stuff that we can share in our post-industrial connectivity. I'll just skip through these because I'm going to move on to some other projects. Oh, this is maybe this would be a good one to connect to, actually, because this is involving the canal network of South Wales. So the Mononbrec Canal, which has been closed off. So moving through the kind of industrial coal fields, where actually now it's just been rebranded as a tourism kind of agenda, really. So it's got a well-being and tourism agenda. But there is a link to that project, and Karen can put that in as well, called Ahoy, What Grows Here. And there's a series of talks there around canal infrastructure and the idea of edges. So we know at the edges, that's where you get the most creativity, the most biodiversity, the most kind of connected kind of things happening. So if we look at the edges between, the canal system and the river, which kind of they follow each other, and the railway, we can sort of start thinking about these as edges and connections, but also as kind of tributaries to capitalism and empire, and really thinking about how to kind of review these kind of industrial landscapes and connect these to conversations around food systems. Okay, so imagine what does that say? Imagine if this land belonged to the community. Okay, so this is one of the first gardens that I made in Swansea, which we kind of used some cultural Olympiad money for. You're a bit embarrassed about saying that, but actually, what we did was we lived just around the corner from this at the time. It was a derelict football stadium in the middle of Swansea. It was kind of like a really kind of sacred space for a lot of football fans. But of course, as part of that kind of redevelopment of Swansea, where they put everything outside the city, where B&Qs live, usually they put all this stuff outside the city and they move the football out. So actually, this became like a derelict spot and was a real problem in terms of antisocial behaviour and things like that. So we managed to secure this land because we said we were working with the Olympics, and they gave it to us for 6 months. And of course, it's still there. I was there the other day. The garden is still there, because actually what happens when you allow the community to take control of something is that, hopefully the rootedness of that community will really kind of take off. And it's been an incredible journey, that project. What was really interesting about it is that in retrospect, what happened was it released public funding for growing across the city, made the first cabinet member for sustainability in Wales in local authority ever as a result of that. It's a culture shift project recognised by the Arts Council of Wales. It's completely redefined the way the funding and socially engaged practice, food can be part of projects and needs to be part of community work. So it's really proud of that project, but most of that is due to the community that we worked with at the time. So we talked to the local community about plans for this football stadium and what they'd like to do. And it's a really dense urban area, terrace housing. Behind us here, you can see Swansea Prison. There's an old Victorian jail there. They've got the ridiculous skyscraper that somebody built, which is mostly empty, of course. It was just a few Swans football players living in it. So this kind of area is on, what's interesting is it's on a part of the city called Sandfields. So it's on the seabed, basically. So it floods all the time when the rain goes too much, comes down from the hill. And it will disappear in the future due to climate change. This area simply will not be part of the coastal landscape. Yet the council and the development and the capitalist kind of ideas are all about developing that coastal landscape, developing that seafront. So the idea of long-term thinking and short-term thinking and value for money, I would say that this is much better value for money in terms of what we're getting out of it, culturally, socially, and economically, compared to some of the things that they're putting on the front. So we did loads of stuff. We built the bread ovens. There's a library there. There's a kitchen. There's a very diverse group of people. I mean, this is a hugely diverse area of the city, the most diverse ward in South Wales, Castle Ward. We've got loads of different community groups. There's Bangladeshi mooli everywhere. Mooli growing everywhere, a huge mooli. There's chili farm going on down there. It's amazing. Chinese community growing in different ways. Growing in crop, growing the same thing and only growing edibles. The idea of growing anything floral, or they're like, why would you do that? What's the point? That could be onions. So like learning about different cultures, learning about different ways of growing and saving seeds and bringing seeds in and sort of sharing recipes. So the first thing we did was build a kitchen, obviously, because you have to taste the mooli, you have to understand that, and kind of all these things being a critical way of bringing the community together. And I just went back with geography students last week, and Dawn and the gang, they showed me the photo album, which I'd never seen before, and they printed everything out in 6x4s. So this is what it looked like, and this is what it looked like when we got there. It was just literally the football stadium being demolished around us. So that's still there. That's good. That's a long-term project, and they run that completely. I'm not involved in it at all, but we are kind of still working with them on different things. The next garden is just down the road a little bit, again in this industrial kind of landscape, and it's in the National Waterfront Museum of Wales. So again, when you think about those museums that really celebrate kind of industrial history, this has got a bit of everything in it. National Museum of Wales has 7 sites across Wales: one for coal, one for wool, one for slate, one for Romans. I can't remember all of them, but this one is a bit of a hodgepodge, a bit of everything in this one, but no real kind of, the missing part is that maybe all of this industrial work wasn't all great. This is all missing from it, okay? So what was really interesting about this was to say, well, what if we made a garden, which was a tool in which we could re-engage the collection? What if we could kind of activate the collection through a garden? And what if we could bring a whole new demographic of people into the museum who are not coming into the museum for the various cultural barriers that are around it? And what if people could be in a museum without being in a museum? And how could we kind of use this green lawn that was built for no particular reason, just kind of green lawn, and it was never used for anything? How could we transform this into a useful space? So so there you go, that's it in its early days being built. So it was all co-designed with a group of people that lived locally. All the produce goes out to feed local communities that live in this part of the city and connect to charities, the Asylum Refugee Charity, the Community Fridge, all kinds of Matt's Cafe, which is an organisation that feeds people. All the produce goes out to these different organisations, and some is kept by the gardeners who come on a weekly basis. And really the idea of co-developing, co-authoring this was really critical from the beginning. So the idea of like, how can this function? How will it connect to the museum? How will it ask critical questions that the museum can't even ask of this work? How will it do something completely different? We've got 6 hives, honey hives at the moment. So we've got pupil referral unit working with the gardens. They come down and learn about beekeeping and things. Yeah, it's a really productive green space. During lockdown, we did a lot of work around sending out seeds. We're in the process of trying to develop a seed library for the project, which is again something really critical. Another part of that jigsaw, compost being a big one, seed libraries, seed sovereignty, really big part of this jigsaw as well. And also the idea, like, if you've ever grown a sunflower, you don't ever need to buy sunflower seeds ever. So there's surely enough sunflower seeds in the world without everybody buying any more Monsanto ones from B&Q. So how can we develop networks of seed sharing systems, which are also cultural, which are also about learning about different cultures and different recipes and different things. So we made a series of posters and we sent out over 400 packs of seeds during lockdown to different people. Talking about these things. We've since developed a kind of social enterprise. I'm just checking the time. Oh gosh. Yeah, I'll speed up. A social enterprise which and recipe cards. Here's some of the produce. It goes out to different places and all the money comes back into the project. Here's the seed library conversation we had recently. And I'm going to really quickly talk about this project because this is quite key as well. So the next project, we've literally only gone about a square mile in this journey I've taken you on, and in one city. This one's called the Street Matters, and it comes as a direct result of these works and many other things as well. But this work is about developing a community neighbourhood plan for a street in the heart of that district of where Betchveg is, which is called Castlewood. And St Helens Road is it's just outside the business improvement district of the Swansea city centre. Thank God. That means nobody wants to invest any money in it, which in some ways is really awful, but in most ways means that we've got an opportunity to say, let's not regenerate it, let's not gentrify it, let's not kind of bring a kind of one-size-fits-all solution to this, but how could we as an arts organisation literally kind of jam something into the mechanism and slow this process down and say, what is the opportunity here then to really rethink this process of placemaking, and how could we be authoring a kind of way of working which is about centering a kind of radical way of imagining a community neighbourhood plan. So what we've been working on is developing a partnership. So our partners are East, the Ethnic Youth Support Team, the YMCA, which works in loads of different groups, Glenvivian Art Gallery, and Caredig, which is a housing association which specifically on this street has a retirement centre for Chinese elders, which is really interesting. So we've been working with all these partners to develop the project. And what we're saying is that at the basis of this community neighbourhood plan is racial justice, climate justice, social justice, and actually the other thing is spatial justice. So what would it be to imagine this neighbourhood plan, but with those principles and with those lenses, if you like, and really kind of think about this as a different way of working. So we're trying to re-engineer the way a local authority works, which is like obviously a really easy thing to do, and to re-engineer the way that things are done to communities, to kind of speak truth to power, to sort of say this is an opportunity to model a different way of working. And it's very kind of early days of the project. I mean, in the sense that we've been working on it for about a year and a half in reality. But essentially, all these kinds of partnerships and connections are really critical to the development. And this is what we've been basically building, because that's the kind of key work really is developing that kind of ground space. I'm just going to flick through some of these really quickly. We've just got some money to develop these rain planters down the street. So we're doing this project where we're developing these downpipe gardens. So they're connecting to people's drain pipes. So we've just done the negotiating with landowners and land businesses to see whether they would like a rain garden outside. I mean, I'd imagine, I don't know if it rains a lot here, but it rains a lot. It rains a lot in Swansea. So one of the key ways of bringing green infrastructure into the street and making that kind of something that people can understand is to literally connect that water system to a garden. So we're just about developing those at the moment. And that's the bit of the street. There's some images. We've got a community archive project as well. So lots of parallels and connections to what's happening here as well in terms of kind of projects and initiatives. What's really interesting is that, like most people, and probably, I don't think you'd have a million different conversations here. You talk to people about their local environment. Most people want the same things. They want a safe, clean, sustainable local environment that they feel that they can be in, that they're not threatened by. They feel safe there. They feel part of it. it's not rocket science, is it? Do you know what I mean? It's like it's everybody wants this thing because actually there's much more in common. We've all got more in common that separates us. What's interesting is the way that people articulate it, or the way they come at that, and the way they kind of phrase that. And that's the kind of engineering of it. It's like, why do you feel like that? And what could be better about that? And what are the forms of cultural spaces that we could make that help kind of bridge that process? This is the Chinese Retirement Center. This is Fun and her gang of elderly, mostly elderly ladies who live there, are amazing. And they make these Dragon Boat Festival buns. They're just amazing. One of our critical friends, I don't know if you know the project Civic Space in Birmingham, is amazing kind of resource and very inspiring project, much further on in its development than us. But we're having some conversations with them about the kind of possibility of them being they're kind of our critical friend, helping us develop the project. What's really critical is that we just managed to get the head of all the different organizations to come together to agree to get on a minibus, go to Birmingham and meet Civic Square. And I think, if you know, that's a big job, isn't it? To convince people to get on a minibus and go on a day trip, get out of your office, come and meet people who are doing really amazing things, talk about it together. And actually that feels like if we could achieve that, that'd be one major thing. And I'll just finish to say that we've got lots of artists in residence working with us. We've got just about to bring a poet in to work with us on a poetry project right in the street. We've got this empty shop, which we're using. It's freezing cold, no electric, no heating, nothing. So this is like seriously luxury, guys. This is freezing in this building. But we've got artists working in the windows, developing different things. This is our kind of core group. And if I think about what does a team of urban kind of architects or urban, this is what it would look like. This is for me, this is what really powerful community kind of work can really look like. I better stop because we're running out of time.
All right, Owen.
We're all right for a minute. Okay. This is one of our artists in residence. So again, lots of connections to what you've been doing. So it's really nice. This is Mohammed Hassan. He's our artist in residence at the moment. There's an Instagram link which Cam can drop in the chat, which gives you a connection to the street matters and to ways of working, so you can follow the progress of the project. We've started this kind of social history project working with People's Collection Wales, where we're focusing on the idea of kind of like the idea of archiving, but decolonizing an archive. Most of the archival stuff we've seen about Swansea and about this street is bearded white men looking very pleased with themselves in some kind of pose. And that is the archive. That is history in Swansea. That is it. But of course, we know that's not the case. It was the second city of sanctuary in the UK. It's got a massive diversity, and it's got, but the narratives. You can see the narratives of power even in this local archive are not reflective of the community. So we're trying to address that by bringing in an artist who's going to work to kind of change that narrative a little bit. You can see that's some of the community archiving stuff that we found. This is the flooding I was talking about. This is this is my last kind of slide. This is my provocation really to you guys, is to think about, maybe there's a toolkit in this, maybe there's a way of developing something. Maybe this connects a lot to what Dana's doing and the work that you're doing with local communities. But if we think about this 25 million, and we think about the 1 million that's for culture, what if there was 1 million of that 25 or 24, 23, whatever, now we're chipping it away. What if there was 1 million that was just about food and food action plan? What if there was a culturally authored, co-authored, intersectional, radical, place-based food plan that could come out of this for the whole of the county? I don't know, we can think about it. But what if that was like the greatest artwork we could make, is a radical food plan that took away food poverty, but really talked about celebrating the fact that we all eat different things, we all like different things, and our cultural identities are really connected to this. So that's my provocation at the end of this conversation, is to think about what if the greatest thing we could do, or what about developing a food plan as part of that regeneration work? Because there's always a regen plan, there's always a tourism plan, there's probably a kayaking plan. So what about a food plan which really kind of speaks to this idea of place and diversity? And I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. That's great. So yeah, fantastic presentations both from Arif and Owen, and like loads to sort of think about. But I just think there's so obviously, you know, been curated in this way, but there's enough crossover between the two of you to kind of just maybe sort of dig a bit deeper into what you both talked about a little bit, and maybe sort of have a little conversation between the two of you as well. I'm not sure how it's working on Zoom. Is it all right if I just sits there, or would he need to go and sit next to Owen in order to kind of?
We can see you both.
Oh, you can see you both and talk,
Yeah.
so we can stay together. That's quite nice, isn't it? And yeah, obviously it'd be great to bring everyone else that's in the room into the conversation as well. Yeah. So, are there any questions here or on the chat, or anything that you'd like to know a little bit more about, or just kind of associations people have got?
Well, you all know about the place at the bottom of Netherfield Road, don't you, where they've got a green, they've organised a green space down there. The council have got a grant, and I went to have a look at it.
Oh, so that's what they're doing.
Yeah, because I put it on Nelson now and then with
Yeah.
the site, and got some really bad feedback from people. But it's a site that it's grass, and they wanted the actual idea to take it to different sorts of parks. But the local people did anything about it, thought it wasn't the grant should have gone to the parks that were already in place, not as a new park. But I thought it was a brilliant idea. So, like you say, growing things, I don't know what they've actually decided is going to happen. But it sounds like, you know, it is a community thing,
Yeah.
but it's not been advertised. Nobody seemed to know about it till last night. And I find that sad.
The football pitch.
You know, bottom Netherfield Road, there's an area where the kids can play, and there's grass at both sides of it. Well, the idea is to turn it into either a nature, you know, for nature reserves or growing things or what have you. And then a marquee up. It was about 10 days ago. The people to go and make the comments about it, but nobody knew about it. And I thought this could be something to do with.
It is. That was more than 200 yards away. And I
No, but
apart from the 5-a-side football pitch.
yeah, it's on that side, but they had all the drawings of that, of what, you know, and people, it was on the internet about it, you could make comments about it. Because I mouthily caused it.
Good.
So I'm the mouthy one, as you probably realised.
Good, really good. I mean, it's really interesting because actually the functionality of that in terms of what it will be used for,
Yeah.
and what it would generate and what it will produce is very different to pouring that money into, let's say, for example, a park, a local park. And that's not to say the local parks don't need the money. So if you look at the Swansea example,
They've got grant as well for refurbishment, the parks that we've put on.
Yeah.
But afterwards, if you want to look at my mobile phone, I've got the comments from the people who were quite anti.
I think one of the strengths of working class communities like Nelson is they've always had a sort of allotment. A lot of good. And it seems to me that is there's a strength there in terms of knowledge. That if you wanted to enhance Friendship Cafe and the Pavilion Cafe and what it did, then being able to get an allotment and grow stuff that you were then cooking in the cafe would involve a whole group of people with new skills that would enhance what's happening really. And then you talked about that growing chilies and mooling, whatever. I mean, we have one of the tremendous things about Nelson is the sheer diversity of people who live here. And they all have their cultural, we all have stuff. So the notion of growing a variety of things, producing meals, selling cookbooks that say this is the sort of things that we all eat here. Now come and have a go at some of this stuff. It's very open-ended. But it's got enduring.
I have a lot of allotment space when you look round. And there are a lot the Good Life project and the other different ones they've got there are fantastic. I don't know anybody.
Sorry, there are actually 10 garden beds there at the cafe.
Yeah.
It's called just before the pandemic, and the aim was for 10 groups to be contacted, communicated to actually run and plant what they need. And then there was obviously pandemic came. And we're hoping this year through the Nelson project, but it's revitalized.
It's a good sized garden bed, fantastic space.
Yeah.
And that was the sort of visioning behind it, that we would have 10 different community groups that would come in and run a bed.
Yes.
And then sizable beds.
Yes.
And grow and develop and plant. And not that not only does that support in terms of actually growing food, but it actually supports interaction and engagement between these community groups, which is almost as important, if not more important.
I think it is, because one of the things that I think I'm most concerned about in terms of the regeneration money is that a lot of it is going to go into capital projects that'll be a thing. And my sense about that is that we need to retain some of that for communities, for future communities as well, because whatever the buildings are, we're the people that live here and we have a stake. And if they put up new buildings, but nothing else changes, then I don't really see much advantage.
This has been a story of the past with the air centre.
We're just thinking about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So actually the air centre is a really good example of it not working.
Yes.
So when you look at the air centre, you look at what was in it and what was created, and you look at the theatres, there was like a really, really nice, fantastic theatre space that they had in there.
It was used.
Yeah. But in terms of it being used well enough for it to justify it remaining and for it to be sustainable, for it to continue to be used, that didn't happen.
But I look back about when the cafe was in that area behind it, that space there would have been fantastic for community outside.
Yes.
And it was why was it never allowed to be used for that? You know, the meeting spaces and community projects. I think I think the council does not do any joint up thinking towards the community around here.
But it goes back.
Are you a councillor?
No, I'm not. But I'm not really a fan of local government because I don't think it is local government. It's local administration of Westminster money. You know, 85% of what we get is what they give us.
Yeah.
But our priorities are not Westminster.
Yeah.
And we're not their priority either. So we have to.
Little Moscow, wasn't it?
Yes, we have a town hall
Did you not know
steps
about
painted red.
No.
Back in the day.
Oh, back in the day, we
Would
used to
they
make
still
one of the big
work?
red committees.
So I think resting power back in local communities and having local government that is actually local government would be, it's crucial. You know, it irritates me beyond measure that we live here, but we don't have control of it.
Is it annoying?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But interestingly, this and what we're performing here as part of the wider project is a form of that input and control, because if you use the ASM for example, I can never remember anyone being asked or engaged as to what do you want in the A Centre, what do you want to happen. However, in terms of this function and this exercise which is being performed and what it's feeding into is directly asking that question. How do you see Nelson being reimagined? How does that look like and how is it shaped?
And that's why this is exciting, I think,
100%.
because we are resting some of that back.
But I think what I'm kind of picking up on from that conversation is also that the kind of the resources and the skills and the knowledge and the space a lot of the time is already here. And it's thinking about sort of, I suppose, within this food plan. I will. Yeah.
It's okay doing consultation. It's all right doing all that. I've been working in communities for 30 odd years. Has there been a change? How are you going to measure what you listen to and think, actually, we've done what you've done? Are you actually going to go back to those communities who you asked? Oh, we've consulted with you, we've asked you, we've had all these brilliant events. And how are you going to measure the fact you've actually listened to them and evaluated? Because what you really need to do is go back to those communities. You wanted that road tarmac. Look, we did it. Because that's the only way you're going to build trust. And that's the only way those people are going to go say, oh, not you again. I'm sorry, it's not happening. It's basically everything is politicalized. All we see is politics everywhere. The fact, I'm being honest here, I know I'm probably the devil's advocate or whatever, but the thing is, it's true. The fact is, we live in these communities, our kids don't want to live in this area, they want to move away because they're sick of it. There's no job, listen, we have to have honest discussion. It's all right glamorizing it with different things, but the fact is, it's not just in Nelson, it's all over. I mean, cost of living, food banks, all this adds up to the same thing, that they are real issues here. We are doing the talking, there's no action,
Exactly.
I rest my case.
So I guess what we're sort of trying to do here then is identify where the resources for the action.
Yeah, we need
But
to
when we
measure that.
start the action,
Yeah.
when we're gonna, when we start actually doing
That's it.
something.
We
Well, I
need
mean,
to go
that's,
back to the community and say, yeah, we listened to you. This is what you wanted. This is what we done. If they want a little garden somewhere, go for it. I want concerts in the park where you got your coffee shop, because you're willing brilliantly with that.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
want festivals in that
Yeah.
park.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
things, things. We want people from outside coming in and saying, yeah, Nelson's done it.
Yeah,
That's what we need.
That's what the cafe wants.
Yeah, and that-
And that fits in line with what the cafe function is supposed to be. And that
Yeah.
works well.
Well,
But it's about, so as in this conversation and having this space to have that conversation works because it brings people together that are aligned in their thinking on what they want to create and what they want to see. And the space is there to make it happen. And then it goes back to the same point. It is around communities being galvanized to make things happen, which is, of course, the wider sort of point and conversation of everything which we're doing.
But it's also important, you've done the events, people turn up to events. So
course.
I'm not gonna just blame you,
Yeah.
people, or politics or whatever.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
The communities out there need to take the initiative. I mean, I worked all day.
Yeah.
I didn't need to be here, but I needed to be here because I'm a grandma. By the time I'm a great grandma, I want this town to be a better town than it was
course.
for me and my
Yeah,
kids.
absolutely.
That's the way I look at it.
so,
And
yeah,
it's
so,
all community.
but I think we can be concrete about how that happens, can't we? Because that's what you're saying. It's like we're mapping out, we're saying where the resources are. We know there's the space, we know there's the will and the need.
Yeah.
And then I think sort of what's great about seeing what both Arif and Owen are bringing to the table is, well, we've done these projects and they've worked.
Mm.
And kind of like, so you can see how kind of you were able to mobilize some of
Yeah.
those resources
Yeah, yeah.
that work. So we don't have to,
That passion.
yes.
Yeah.
So,
Think of the
yeah.
future. We need to capture it. We
Absolutely.
need to get,
Yeah.
have them do anything
So as
further.
part of that sort of
Yeah.
plan, there's also the, what's the next step?
Yeah.
And so what were the first steps in, say, I mean, I really, the one that's kind of hitting me the most is the empty football
Yeah.
sort of stadium turned into the growing patch. Yeah, what was that first day, or how did that very initial, because I suppose what's your name, sorry?
Nazia.
What Basie is saying about kind of fatigue of consultation must be the same in Swansea.
Yeah.
And kind of, so how did you get people on side to be like, oh, well, this isn't like that this time, how we're going to actually go out and start?
Well, I think with that project, I mean, I wanted to just say, well, one thing is that you're really working with this idea of future generations. You're talking about being a great grandmother and like wanting this place to be better. It's really want to recognize that. That's really powerful and really exciting. So how are we going to do that work? How are we going to kind of manifest it? How are we going to safeguard it? How are we going to how are these resources going to be knitted together? So in that project, for example, we literally just knocked doors, and it was just me and somebody else just knocking doors saying, do you want to talk about this empty football stadium? Because the council wanted to sell it to Tesco. They wanted to sell the land and get rid of it and capitalize on that. And there was no green space in that part of the city at all, really densely populated. And there is the beach, which is amazing. But there's a 4-lane, really like one of the busiest roads in that part of the country there, which is really dangerous. You can't tell the kids, oh, just go down the beach. They need green space as well. Yeah. So we needed that kind of activation of that space. So we literally started to talk about how could we start to seed in a long-term use for this, and how could we start to think about a different way of using it and a different way that could be, a bit of community control. And that's how we got to the idea of developing a garden, because at the time there was a lot of kind of tensions in the area as well. So you had lots of people like living next door to each other, never having conversations, people moaning about people who are working nighttime economy, or people saying, oh, his taxi's always blocking the street, all this kind of sort of stuff. But actually underneath it all, there was racial tensions going on all the time. Actually they wouldn't necessarily have kind of used that word, but actually if you looked at it, there was serious kind of issues going on. And what was great about the garden was that there was nothing like a massive big pile of compost and like a load of tools to get people kind of working together on something. So the kind of breaking down the boundary of that and using the cultural kind of opportunity of the Olympic thing to get hold of that piece of land. So literally just knocking doors and talking to people. and saying, what would you like to do with it? And people just said, we want a green space, we want an outdoor community centre, we want somewhere to grow food, and because everybody had a teeny tiny back garden. So it was just like common sense, really.
But those people that you were knocking on the doors of were also the people that came and did the building of it. And how did that sort of negotiation? Because I mean, I suppose in Swansea, probably like here's that idea of spare time is quite.
Well, people just turned up, you know, because they just were really enthused about the idea. I mean, we did different drop-ins at different times of the day. We did loads of, like we went to, we realized that we were holding a load of meetings in church halls, and then realizing, well, not everybody wants to come to a church hall. Not everybody feels comfortable in a church hall, realizing by making basically loads of mistakes like that. And then realizing, oh, this consultation needs to take different forms. So we even went to all the pubs. We did all that stuff, and people just came to rock up, and we allocated space, and you had to live in the area. That was the kind of key thing, was you had to live within walking distance. You had people turning up from other part of the city going, I'd like one. And when actually we sort of made a decision that you have to be able to walk here and you have to live in this area to be part of this project. And that's how it started, really. And then the kitchen was like, everything was just built. Like, what's the next logical step? Oh, kitchen. What's the next logical step? A compost toilet. What's the next logical? It just sort of happened like that, really. And I think it's the simple form. Like the garden is a really radical space. It's a space where you can have different kinds of conversations. Same as the kitchen. You know, the kitchen is the heart of the house, isn't it? It's where everything happens. So, yeah.
Can I ask Can I ask a kind of follow-up question on that? So once you've got that kind of space established, how do you keep the engagement? I know you said that you kind of step back. How do you ensure that that's a kind of self-sustaining community?
Yeah, often in these projects, what's really a good way of doing, especially if you're using kind of cultural initiative, because obviously the cultural money can be used to set something up, but can't necessarily be there for long term. And actually, the long-term cultural engagement can ruin it as well. So sometimes it's good to devise or build into that project a kind of way of passing it on, or a way of that co-developed, co-collaboration becoming, actually, we don't need this now. And it doesn't matter that doesn't matter if it's an artwork or not. Actually, what's nice is that people are using it and it's cultural and it's there. So we kind of tried to build that into the process. So basically, I started backing away slowly, and the community were getting more and more confident in how they were developing it. And as I said, it's over 10 years old now, and there's over about 150 people gardening there. See, you know, like it's just really, really kind of rich kind of resource for the community. But that building in that kind of passing it on is part of that work, I think, for me. And I think that's really, you know, the succession of these projects, probably a bit like the cafe, like what is the future for that cafe? Like, how do you, you know, yes, you could develop another one, you could develop a network of these, but actually, when do the community start to run that, and actually you can back away from it, because it's about this. So that's the kind of that's a successful model in lots of ways, isn't it?
Yeah, and the cafe as an example has been interesting, because from the time we started to now, when we look at people and manpower, so the level of service and what we're delivering has increased.
Yeah,
in fact, it's doubled. And the number of people we are serving has increased.
Yeah,
but organically, the number of volunteers and people engaged and their diverse backgrounds has also increased. And that has gone sort of hand in hand. And I think now we're at a stage where we have, let's say, a group of core volunteers, I would say, who are almost ready to move on, not move on, but move on and create and engage and do something perhaps developmental or do something different, because there's a resource base there of really good volunteers who know exactly what they're doing, exactly, you know, how they're doing it, and can literally crack on and run a session without any issues whatsoever. And that's come sort of organically over time.
And could you resource that group of volunteers to set up another cafe, for example?
So almost if you looked at it like a franchising model, not that it's a franchise or it's like a commercial enterprise, but not that it's like that, but you could lift and shift it, because you've got the systems, you've got the processes, you know how things run, you know what the requirements are, and it's about putting the people into the relevant spots to perform a function and do a role. So it can be done. It can be done.
So because what's interesting for me is that these projects are very similar in what they do. There's the only difference is that one's an art project and one doesn't identify, but actually the garden doesn't identify as an art project anymore anyway. So these are just basically parallel projects. So what's happened now is that we've got people growing loads more. They're very confident growers. They planted an orchard out in the rest of the park. Because they planted an orchard, it meant that the council couldn't sell one little part of it. So they're sneakily kind of taking over the whole green space. So like this archipelago, this growing of upskilling community, this growing of green spaces across the city, or cafe services, this could be really exciting in terms of how to develop and grow that resistance. Because I think it's important to see it as a kind of community resistance rather than like, because even when you said franchise, you were like, oh, it's not a nice word, is it? Because it's a bit like, you know, we're not a franchise, but actually, what about a network of resistance rather than a franchise?
Before we finish, am I okay to just pass on a question from the?
Yes, we can go up for a couple more minutes, I think.
Okay, cool. So this question is from Jane Gary, and it says, have either of you encountered hostility to your projects, or have you found food is a good neutral space to gather many different perspectives around? I'm thinking of the recent anger around LTNs or 15-minute cities and the way they have proved divisive. Or is it all about the way these schemes are or are not co-authored? Do you want to hear it again?
Well, did you in the first bit? Is there any? Has there been any hostility around the idea of a garden or food? Is it always? No.
How can there be any hostility when there's a beautifully smelling 3-course meal?
It's the level.
Food is there's a concept of breaking bread, but food is a real strong means and mechanism of bringing people together. And we found that. So, of course, because of the diverse mix of individuals which come to our cafe with a range of different backgrounds and, let's say, experiences, it can be a bit of a melting pot. But food sort of resolves any issues and problems, and it brings people together in a really sort of community-oriented way, which is the function of it, and that's the functionality of it. And we're using food as an example. Can't really think. Sport can be another example, but I can't think of many other really good examples that are as universal as something like food, because of course everyone has to eat and everyone does eat.
Music,
yeah.
Oh, I've definitely done some music stuff that divides it. It's not always the most universal.
I'm just thinking, like, what's the next bit of that is like, oh, maybe housing, housing projects, like, wouldn't it be great if part of that kind of continuation of like the cafe or the garden is the housing? So the next thing, we should collaborate now, and we should make, like, the next project would be a housing project, and the next project would be what? A transport system. Because actually the community has the answers to a lot of these questions and can articulate this and have the skill sets. They're just not allowed to perform them all the time because of the systems we live in. But just to say that, of course we've had conflict. People have slammed their tools down in anger because whatever reason, not enough tomato plants, not enough watering cans. People are people, at the end of the day. So there's always going to be something like that happening. But actually, it's when we come back together and there's a food system. It's that thing you just said so beautifully. That's the uniting things. Isn't it?
Great. Okay. Well, thanks very much to Owen and Arif. Fantastic. I'm just going to share the last slide on here. So our next interdisciplinary conversation is on Wednesday, 26th of April, and we'll be inviting Keir Milburn over, who's part of a think tank around sort of rethinking about this idea of the commons and how you sort of activate the commons. So this sort of, well, what's here? How can we create these kind of circles or circuits that might make some of these things real and fund them and give people time to be involved in them, and then not just to exist as kind of sort of nice ideas, but how do you actually build the infrastructure for those things happening? As well as that, we've got loads to sort of recap on tonight and what's to sort of pull out. And I think Andrew's probably been doing a nice job of gathering some quotes and bits. We'll have the recording as well, won't we, to kind of go online if you want to go and look back at any of this, and we'll sort of take some questions or prompts or provocations, or even this idea of creating the food plan for Nelson or Pendle as a kind of starting point for an exercise. I think Diana will help facilitate at some point for us. So yeah, keep an eye on well, both through This Is Nelson and In-Situ trends.
I just wanted to actually flag an event that Super Slowway are doing, the Ripple Effect, on this Saturday. So if you are interested in this general subject matter, and just try, there is a workshop happening on Saturday. Best to check out Ripple Super Slowway's information, but just say a woman, Lucy Antal from Alchemic Kitchen. Who is she's going to be running a talk this Saturday, an interactive talk on sustainable food and local produce, and explore the opportunities Nelson hosts with growing and eating. So there is actually some more talk in the subject if you're interested. This is on Saturday.
And it's happening at the Hodge House allotments up at Holland Place, Nelson. The postcode is BB9 8HD.
What time is it, Ozzy?
It is at 11 AM till 1 PM.
There we go. There we go.
And once every month we have meetings to the same sort of thing. I don't know if you heard about the Ripple Effect, but it's over running 4 weeks. So
Yeah.
1 week we do canoeing, 1 week we do cycling, 1 week we do gardening, and then the other ones workshops. So it is, and the community is starting to enjoy it and get involved.
Yeah. So yeah.
Saturday at Good Life Project.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how they can fit in.
Yeah.
Right, do we
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much. Cheers to Callum for being the great tech.